Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a magnifying glass to, well, the intersection of Hollywood spectacle and some really cold, hard space science.
We're talking about the 2015 blockbuster, The Martian.
Exactly.
hmm
A film that was, it was essentially a love letter to engineering and botany, all wrapped up in this massive survival story.
And you just can't start this deep dive without talking about the timing of its release. It was cosmic, really.
It really was.
The movie, with Matt Damon as the stranded astronaut Mark Watney, it comes out in theaters the exact same week that
Not the same week.
the exact same week NASA announces they have confirmed evidence of liquid flowing water on Mars.
I remember that so vividly. It almost felt orchestrated, like this perfectly executed PR move.
Well, NASA was working very closely with the production team.
Right, and then, right on cue, they dropped this huge real-world discovery. It was described as almost too perfect a piece of cross-promotion.
It really was. And it absolutely set the stage for this immediate public fascination with, the idea of long-term missions to Mars actually being viable.
In the film itself, the whole premise is built on this one idea.
Right. That science, if you apply it with enough creativity and just sheer persistence, it can solve literally any problem.
Which brings us to Watney's mission statement, which has become, it's iconic now.
To science the ST out of this.
Our mission today is to really test that idea. We're going to scrutinize the source material that made the movie so famous. We've got a whole stack of research articles, toxicology reports, physics calculations.
We're basically going to fact check the core survival mechanisms. We're talking about the diet, the fertilizer, and even this hidden geological threat that the author himself couldn't have known about when he first wrote the book.
We're going to break down how something as simple as 1/3 Martian gravity actually saves Watney's life.
And why using, human waste as fertilizer was surprisingly not just effective, but safe.
And how he theoretically survives the deadly salts that are just latent in the Martian soil.
And then, after we've gone through all the science, we'll shift gears a bit and look at the film's production and really its critical reception.
Right, because even though The Martian was praised everywhere for its scientific accuracy, a lot of viewers found that the sheer predictability of all that problem solving,
Yeah.
it kind of drained the film of any real dramatic tension.
The very thing that made the science so airtight is what some critics felt made the movie, well, a little boring.
Okay, let's unpack all of this.
Yeah.
And we have to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
The inciting incident. The thing that strands Watney on the Red Planet in the first place.
So you've got the Ares III crew commander Louis Martinez Johansson Beck Vogel. They're forced to abort their mission at Acidalia Planitia. This is on Sol 18.
And they have to evacuate during this just massive dust storm. They think Watney is dead after it gets hit by debris, and they take off without him.
And that whole sequence, it's so dramatic, right? It's crucial. You need a way to separate the hero from his crew and all their resources. But it contains the single biggest scientific inaccuracy in the entire film.
And it's a big one. It's a fundamental failure of atmospheric physics.
Yeah. I think most people watching it, you see these huge winds whipping around. You just naturally assume Mars has violent weather, sort of like Earth.
But the sources are just crystal clear on this.
Yeah?
That storm, as depicted, just couldn't happen in reality.
The problem isn't the wind speed. You can have very high wind speeds on Mars. The problem is the density of the air.
Okay.
So when we talk about wind on Earth, what we're really talking about is air pressure and density transferring kinetic energy. A lot of molecules hitting you at once.
Right, it's the weight of the air moving.
Exactly. On Mars, the atmosphere is incredibly thin. It's only about 1%. 1%. The thickness of Earth's.
So even if the wind is moving incredibly fast, let's say 120 miles an hour.
Which is really moving.
Yeah, but the force it actually delivers is minimal. It's like being hit by a feather duster moving at hurricane speeds.
That's a perfect analogy. You can have these incredibly high wind speeds, but because the mass of the air molecules is so low, they just can't transfer enough energy to do any real structural damage.
So to put that in perspective.
To get a sense of scale, even the absolute worst planet-encircling dust storms that Mars experiences, and these only happen once every 5 years or so, they wouldn't generate enough force to register as even a minor Category 1 hurricane here on Earth.
So the idea that Watney would get knocked over,
Maybe, if he wasn't paying attention. But the idea that the MAV, the Mars Ascent Vehicle, this huge rocket, would be at risk of tipping over.
Or that a huge satellite dish would be ripped off the building and sent flying like a javelin to impale him.
That is pure Hollywood invention. It's a necessary plot device, but we have to acknowledge it is the biggest cheat in the whole film.
And the filmmakers knew this, right?
Oh, completely. The director, Ridley Scott, the screenwriter, Drew Goddard, they were perfectly aware. They knew the physics didn't add up, but you need that immediate life-threatening peril to separate the astronaut from the group.
Because if the winds were realistic,
Watney would have just walked back to the hab after the storm passed and found his crew waiting for him. End of movie.
it does set up the core challenge beautifully, though. Watney survives, but now he's got this immediate, completely impossible resource allocation problem.
Right. He's stranded on Sol 18, and the next possible crewed mission, Ares the Fifth, isn't showing up for 4 years. He's got to stretch a few months of rations into a few years.
Which leads us directly into, I guess, part 2, the infamous potato problem.
Exactly. He's the mission botanist, so his his first instinct is to create a farm inside the hab. And he decides to rely almost exclusively on the humble potato.
And this is the big question everyone asks. Can a person really survive for years off nothing but potatoes? My gut reaction is that this has to lead to some kind of severe nutritional deficiency like scurvy or something else just as debilitating.
And that is the beautiful scientific surprise of the whole story. The answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely. The potato gets a really underserved bad rap in modern diet culture. It is an incredibly versatile, nutritionally comprehensive survival food.
So what is it providing that makes it so successful?
Well, it's a carbohydrate powerhouse, obviously, which gives you the energy you need, but crucially, it contains really high levels of vitamin C.
Ah, so that's the key to preventing scurvy.
That's the key. Scurvy is one of the biggest dangers in any kind of long-term isolation diet. It also gives you vitamin K, most of the B vitamins, potassium, magnesium, and a pretty decent amount of fiber and protein.
Okay, so if the potato provides almost everything, what are those minor missing elements? What would he still need to supplement?
So the sources confirm that the main long-term deficiencies would be vitamin A, vitamin B12, and vitamin E, along with calcium.
Vitamin B12 is the tricky one.
That's the big one. It's very difficult to get from plant sources. It's typically found in meat and dairy, and a B12 deficiency can lead to really severe, irreversible nerve damage.
But Watney is an astronaut on a long-duration mission. I mean, it is highly plausible that his emergency kit, or just the rations left behind by the crew, would include multivitamins.
Absolutely. They'd be designed to cover those exact gaps. If he has access to supplemental pills, the potato diet works beautifully.
And we actually have real-world proof of this concept.
We do. We've got to mention the incredible dedication of Chris Voy, who was the executive director of the Washington State Potato Commission.
This is an amazing story.
It really is. He successfully ate nothing but potatoes for 60 days. 60 days. Just to prove scientifically that survival was possible.
That is a level of commitment I really admire, though I have to imagine the sheer monotony, the repetition would just be grueling.
His blog entries from that time are pretty illuminating. He confirmed that, yes, he survived and his health markers were all stable, but he constantly emphasized, you're not going to enjoy yourself.
Functional but profoundly dull.
Exactly. And Watney is facing hundreds of sols of this. That's a huge psychological hurdle to clear.
But let's talk about the math problem, because this is where, on paper, the survival seems to fall apart, and where we have to bring the physics back in.
Right.
Watney is rationing severely. Maybe he's eating 1, maybe 2 medium potatoes a day. If the medium potato is, around 163 calories?
Roughly, yeah.
And an average active man needs about 2,000 calories daily just to maintain weight. Watney should have starved within weeks? The caloric math just seems impossible.
This is where we have to introduce the crucial and often overlooked Martian gravity cheat code. The math only works because he's not on Earth.
He's experiencing only 1/3 of Earth's gravity.
Which fundamentally alters his energy expenditure for the hundreds of demanding tasks he has to perform every day.
We tend to think of gravity just in terms of weight, but here it's about, the energy he's burning.
Precisely. Let's think about the work Watney actually does. He's carrying tools, he's lifting heavy equipment like the Hab airlock, moving huge bags of soil, modifying the rover for these long journeys.
On Earth, lifting, say, 100 kilograms of equipment would require a massive expenditure of caloric energy.
A huge amount.
Yeah.
But on Mars, that same 100-kilogram object has the gravitational pull of only about 37 kilograms.
So he's expending far, far less energy to achieve the same amount of physical work. It just drastically lowers his required caloric intake.
Exactly. His basal metabolic rate, so the energy needed just to keep his body functioning at rest, that stays pretty constant. But the energy he needs for labor just plummets.
So while an average active guy on Earth needs 2,000 calories, Watney's actual daily burn, even when he's doing all this physical labor, is significantly lower.
So you combine that reduced daily expenditure with the limited initial rations he has, which he's stretching out, and the continuous potato crop. And the math suddenly shifts from being absurdly insufficient to surprisingly plausible.
So the low-gravity environment is arguably just as critical to his survival as his botany skills.
It is the absolute foundation that makes the whole farming venture viable. Without that 1/3 gravity reduction, he'd be working constantly, burning through his calories way too quickly for his small potato yield to keep up.
But because the physics reduce his required fuel, the potato diet, as long as he has those vitamin supplements, is scientifically sound.
It absolutely holds up under rigorous caloric and gravitational analysis.
That is genuinely fascinating. It's just astonishing that the difference between survival and death is simply 1/3 gravity and a bottle of multivitamins.
It really is.
But the potato itself is just one piece of the puzzle. He still couldn't grow them in raw Martian soil.
Yeah.
That brings us to the fertilizer fiasco.
Right. Watney realized very quickly she had a massive nitrogen problem. Martian soil is, for all intents and purposes, sterile and toxic. It lacks the necessary bacteria to fix nitrogen.
Can you just elaborate on what nitrogen fixation is for our listeners? Why is that so essential for plant growth?
Certainly. So on Earth, plants need nitrogen to build essential things like proteins and DNA. And while nitrogen gas makes up, 78% of our atmosphere, plants can't just absorb it directly from the air.
They need it to be converted.
They need it to be converted or fixed into usable compounds like ammonia and nitrates. And on Earth, this is done naturally by certain types of symbiotic bacteria that live in the soil.
So Martian soil is sterile, which means it doesn't have these bacteria. Even if Watney has a pressurized hab with atmosphere, his potatoes are just going to fail to grow past the seedling stage.
Exactly. He needs a source of readily available fixed nitrogen. And the fastest, most reliable source of fixed nitrogen that Watney had access to was, quite literally, himself and his crewmates.
That's where the poop science comes in.
Ah.
He uses his own feces, and then he reclaims the freeze-dried feces left behind by his crewmates as manure to fertilize the soil.
And while it sounds pretty unpleasant, this is far from a new idea. Using human excrement as manure started thousands of years ago in various civilizations, especially in Asia. It was historically known as night soil.
And we still do it today, just with, much more stringent safety protocols.
We do. It's now scientifically and hygienically referred to as biosolids. And when it's treated properly, it's an extremely efficient, economically valuable, and ecologically sound fertilizer.
The sources mentioned that as of 2013, over half of U.S. sewage solids were being converted into biosolids for agriculture.
And farmers actively petition to get more of it. It's a resource we actively seek out.
But this brings us to the huge biological hazard. On Earth, you can't just spread raw human waste on crops. The film kind of skated over this massive issue.
Yeah.
The threat of pathogens.
The pathogen threat is immediate, and it's real. Humans carry countless pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, things like E. coli or hepatitis A. We might be immune to our own, but if those pathogens transfer from the raw manure into the soil and then into the potatoes,
the result could be a catastrophic illness. It would render him incapable of working, which, on Mars, means certain death.
Absolutely. If he had used fresh waste, it would have been a massive biological disaster that would have ended this deep dive very quickly.
So what's the solution?
This is where the Martian environment itself performs a kind of sanitation duty for him. It turns a biological hazard into a safe resource.
How so?
Well, the waste left behind by the Ares III crew was freeze-dried. Then, when they evacuated, it was exposed to the near vacuum and the sub-freezing temperatures of the Martian atmosphere.
So the extreme environmental conditions did the sterilization work for him?
Precisely. The freeze-drying removes the water needed for life, and then the combination of near vacuum and prolonged, intense cold would have effectively killed almost all known terrestrial pathogens. It sterilized the material.
The environment acted like a massive natural autoclave.
Exactly. So Watney wasn't just a genius botanist. He benefited from Martian physics and geology doing all of his safety work for him.
So the low-gravity calorie problem is solved, the potato nutrition problem is solved, and the fecal fertilizer pathogen problem is solved by the environment itself. The survival plan is surprisingly robust.
It is, which makes this next section so critical, because we noted that the science was almost 100% airtight.
Yep.
There was one critical discovery made after the book was written that posed an immediate existential threat to Watney.
Okay, here's where the deep dive gets really interesting and, frankly, a little terrifying. This is the post-book discovery. It was made in May 2008 by the Phoenix Mars lander. What did they find hidden in the Martian soil?
The Phoenix lander performed the very first wet chemical analysis of the dirt on the Martian surface, and it found that the soil was absolutely laden with salts, specifically perchlorate.
Perchlorate. And the concentration was alarming. Roughly 6% of the Martian soil is perchlorate.
6%. That's a massive amount of contaminant. And we know perchlorates as these industrial chemicals used in things like rocket propellants and fireworks.
Which should immediately signal that this is not something you want to be eating.
Not at all. And you touched on its environmental role, too. Perchlorate salts are the reason liquid water can temporarily exist on Mars in sub-zero temperatures. They act as a highly effective salt-based antifreeze.
So it's a key part of Martian geology, but a profound threat to biology.
A profound threat. And 6% concentration is clearly well above any safe, regulated amounts we have here on Earth.
So why is ingesting perchlorate salt such a potential fatal flaw for Watney's survival? What does it do to you?
The core mechanism of toxicity is metabolic disruption. It specifically targets your thyroid gland.
Okay.
Perchlorates actively interfere with your body's ability to absorb iodine. And iodine is absolutely essential for the production of thyroid hormones, which are the master regulators of your entire metabolic system.
And if those hormones are disrupted, what happens?
If you can't produce enough thyroid hormone, you suffer from hypothyroidism. And this doesn't just make you tired. The thyroid regulates fundamental processes like mood, body temperature, appetite, sleep cycles, heart rate.
And long-term exposure can be even worse.
It can significantly increase the chance of developing thyroid cancer. For an astronaut who's already under immense stress and needs peak cognitive function, thyroid disruption could be crippling.
So the question shifts from, can I grow potatoes,
Yeah.
to, will these potatoes poison me? We had to figure out his exposure levels to see if this is an immediate, deadly threat.
Exactly. We have to calculate his exposure through two main vectors. Dust inhalation, which is just unavoidable on Mars, and then plant absorption through his potato crop.
Let's start with the dust. What's the baseline level of exposure just from breathing and moving around inside the hab?
Okay, so the Environmental Protection Agency suggests that a typical human on Earth consumes, through involuntary ingestion of dust and dirt, about 100 milligrams of soil per day.
Okay.
If we assume the hab is dusty and Watney is active, he's probably ingesting at least this baseline amount of Martian dirt. And given that 6% of that dirt is perchlorate, Watney could be consuming 6 milligrams of perchlorate daily just from the dust.
And then the soil itself will transfer that salt to the food he's eating.
Right. Plants absorb salts from the soil. Aggressively rounding up, let's estimate he might consume another milligram of perchlorate daily through the potatoes themselves.
So his total daily consumption, in a worst-case scenario, is about 7 milligrams of perchlorate per day over the roughly 500 sols he has to survive.
That's the number we have to work with.
Now for the crucial moment. How does that 7 milligram dose compare to real-world toxicology studies on healthy humans?
This is where the science performs its final heroic save. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry conducted controlled tests on healthy volunteers. They ran 2 groups.
And what did those test groups consume?
The first group consumed a high dose, 35 milligrams of perchlorate per day, sustained over 14 days.
Okay, that's a lot.
The second group consumed a lower but still significant dose, 3 milligrams per day, but sustained over 6 months. And in both groups, there were no observable clinical effects on their thyroid function or their overall health. They were absolutely fine.
That is genuinely astonishing. Watney's worst-case consumption, 7 milligrams a day, is less than a third of the high-dose test group.
And only about twice the dose of the 6-month test group, though obviously over a longer duration.
But the longitudinal research supports the finding that his exposure level is basically non-toxic over that survival period.
It is. While 6% concentration sounds terrifyingly high, The absolute volume of dirt or potato matter required to reach a toxic threshold is just much greater than what Watney is actually consuming.
So even the supposedly fatal flaw, the one discovered after the fact, is scientifically surmountable under the constraints of his journey.
He's in the clear, theoretically. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say the 7 milligram per day was instantly toxic. What would be the obvious low-tech solution for a botanist?
The sources suggest the solution is almost insultingly simple. Just wash the dirt.
Exactly. Perchlorate is just a highly soluble salt, so the idiot-proof solution would be to use water, which he has to generate constantly anyway, to leach the perchlorate out of the soil.
You'd soak the soil, the salt dissolves, you pour the resulting salt brine out.
And then you reclaim the water you use by boiling the brine and collecting the condensation. Problem solved.
But the logistical challenge there is the water itself. Water is his most precious resource. Spending massive amounts of it to wash thousands of pounds of dirt would have been an incredibly complex calculation of risk versus reward.
It just shifts the problem from a biological one to a massive engineering and water recycling problem. But the fact remains, the survival farming scenes, from the low-calorie potato diet to the sterilized fecal fertilizer to overcoming the potentially deadly perchlorate salt, they are all remarkably well-researched and defensible. The science is incredibly sound.
The science absolutely holds up under the theoretical stress test. And this fidelity to science, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just based on one author's research. It was the result of a massive, almost unprecedented collaboration.
Right, which leads us to the reality behind the film's production.
This film became an immediate benchmark for hard science fiction, and the production team went to extreme lengths to ensure accuracy. And that was primarily driven by a deep partnership with NASA.
The film's critical consensus was just overwhelming. 91% certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and a cinema score from audiences. It was universally noted for being visually stunning, scientifically credible, and immensely likable.
And NASA saw this project as a golden opportunity.
No, absolutely. They viewed it as a chance to promote space exploration, to attract a new generation of scientists and engineers, and just generally boost the agency's public image. It was basically a massive, big-budget recruiting ad for them.
They didn't just offer, cursory advice. They embedded themselves in the process. We're talking about key figures, like James L. Green, who was the director of the Planetary Science Division, advising Ridley Scott directly.
NASA set up dedicated teams to answer hundreds of minute, highly technical production questions. They weighed in on everything from the appearance of the future habitats, the HABs, to the precise chemical workings of the radioisotope power systems and the mechanics of the Mars ascent vehicle.
The level of detail was incredible. They provided hundreds of actual high-resolution images of Mars and their control centers, helping the production designers replicate everything down to the specific computer screen layouts.
The production designer, Arthur Max, he immersed himself in the source material. He even took an extensive 8-hour tour of the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
The goal was to build a world that felt authentic, but still futuristic enough for a major film.
Right. And I found the contrast in the sources on this fascinating. Max's mission control set, which was built in Budapest, was described by one reviewer as the space agency that we all dream of. Modern, sleek, well-lit.
Whereas the real Johnson Space Center, at least at the time, was described a bit less glamorously, more like a run-down college campus.
Right. Scott and Max consciously chose to infuse the realism with a dose of aspirational, futuristic optimism. It's Hollywood polishing the dream.
Which is understandable. But their commitment went even deeper than set design.
It absolutely did. As a sign of that commitment, NASA's liaison took the actual front page of the script and included it in the payload of the Orion spacecraft during its first test flight back in 2014.
They physically took the story into space.
They did, connecting the fiction directly to the agency's future reality. It was a huge statement.
So let's quickly review some of the other key scientific moments in the film, moving past the farming, that were confirmed as realistic.
Okay, so Watney's genius wasn't limited to botany. He faced the immediate, terrifying challenge of water scarcity.
And his solution was to chemically produce water by burning leftover rocket fuel, specifically the highly reactive hydrazine.
That process is chemically accurate and theoretically possible, although extremely dangerous, as he finds out.
And the power source for heat and electricity.
The use of the radioisotope thermoelectric generator, the RTG, is spot on. RTGs convert heat from the natural decay of plutonium into electricity. They're used on long-duration robotic missions like the Voyager probes. It is absolutely the appropriate power source for an isolated Martian habitat.
And then, of course, the grand finale. The rescue plan executed by the Hermes crew, involving that famous slingshot maneuver.
That maneuver, the gravity assist, is not science fiction in the slightest. It's a standard, well-known practice in orbital mechanics. It's used frequently on robotic missions. It was even considered a backup strategy on the Apollo missions. It would have been one of the first, most logical approaches NASA would have considered.
So the major scientific moments are confirmed. But what about the few minor inaccuracies that still slip through?
We already covered the big one, the storm. The two main minor flaws are logistical and visual. First, the duct tape repair.
Right, when the airlock blows.
He patches this massive opening with plastic tarp and good old duct tape. The adhesive on standard duct tape would fail almost instantly in the average Martian temperature of minus 60 degrees Celsius. It just wouldn't hold.
And the second minor flaw is the visual depiction of Watney himself. Ridley Scott chose not to show the full effects of the one-third Martian gravity on Matt Damon's movements.
That's right. Scott's argument was that the weight of the spacesuits would compensate for the low gravity, which is a convenient cinematic excuse. But for pure realism, Watney should have been moving with a much more noticeable, bouncy gait, even inside the HAB.
Especially since, as we discussed, that low gravity is so critical to his caloric survival.
They just chose to minimize the visual effect of it.
So overall, the film emerges as one of the most scientifically accurate depictions of space survival ever put to film. The accuracy is exceptional.
Which brings us to the most surprising finding in our sources, the critical disappointment.
This is the ultimate paradox of hard science fiction, isn't it? The film was a huge success, yes, but when you look at the user reviews, that critical segment hovering around a 6 out of 10 score, you see this recurring theme, a significant lack of emotional punch or suspense.
It seems the film's dedication to logic became its narrative undoing. The consensus from that group was that the plot was formulaic, safe, dull, and predictable.
If you think about it from a storytelling perspective, it makes sense. In a typical survival story, the hero faces some insurmountable peril that requires a moment of, magical ingenuity or just pure luck.
Right. But in The Martian, every single problem Watney faces is immediately met with a clear, logical engineering solution.
There's no unexpected monster, no sudden psychological breakdown, no random event that defies physics. It's just problem, calculation, solution.
Well, exactly. One viewer noted they saw the scene where Watney's garden blows away, which is the one moment of major setback. They saw it coming from a mile away. The sheer predictability of that cause and effect relationship just inherently removes the potential for the kind of peril that drives dramatic suspense.
And this predictability extended to the main character himself. Matt Damon's performance, while praised by many as superb and likable,
Was criticized by others for making Watney feel emotionally inert, almost too competent.
The sources were pretty blunt. They called him ludicrously miscast, too calm, too smug, too muscular, too assured, and emotionally unaffected by his plight.
Watney's whole approach, constantly documenting his problems and solutions in a video diary while injecting these lame jokes. It made him feel less like a man facing imminent death and more like, as one critic put it, MacGyver on Mars.
That hero archetype, the unflappable engineer, was fantastic for the science, but terrible for the terror.
Right. Critics felt the film scienced the beauty out of it, that it lacked depth, introspection, philosophy, or humanity. The focus on the mechanics of survival was so absolute that some felt it had an atmosphere as exciting as a how-to manual.
Which is such an interesting tension. The audience that wants hard science absolutely loves it. The audience that wants drama and emotional investment feels a little cheated.
It creates this genre confusion, which is perfectly illustrated by the fact that the film actually won the Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Musical or Comedy.
That still sounds ridiculous to me. I mean, the stakes are being stranded alone on a cold, desolate planet. How do you explain that classification?
It really stems from the director and the screenwriter actively trying to lighten the tone. There are two running comedic elements. First, Watney's video diaries are full of self-deprecating humor.
And second, that relentless 1970s disco playlist left behind by Commander Lewis.
Which Watney hates, but is forced to endure. That playlist, with tracks like Hot Stuff, Turn the Beat Around, and of course, I Will Survive.
It serves as this kind of diegetic, sometimes painfully literal commentary on his situation.
It does. It attempts to inject fun and accessibility into what should be a terrifying ordeal, and that leads to that bizarre classification. They chose to make an optimistic adventure film about science rather than a psychologically grueling survival horror film.
Okay, let's circle back to our core mission and synthesize these findings. We confirm that the central pillars of Watney's survival, the potato diet, the sterilized fecal fertilizer, the water production, the power source, the rescue maneuver, are all remarkably well-researched and scientifically defensible.
He absolutely passes the theoretical stress test with flying colors. Even that unexpected threat of the perchlorate salt is rendered non-toxic by the math. The physicist Brian Cox even hailed the film as the best advert for a career in engineering I've ever seen.
The film's success really demonstrates the profound value and the wide appeal of hard science fiction when it's executed correctly. It makes the process of solving impossible problems look cool and accessible and deeply empowering.
And that inspiration, it turns out, has translated into a lasting, real-world scientific tribute.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider today. In what extent does compelling, realistic science and fiction actually inspire real-world discovery?
Well, consider this. Shortly after the film's success, a newly discovered drought-resistant species of Australian bush tomato was officially named Solanum watney.
Solanum watney, a real species from the same genus as the potato he survived on, named after the fictional heroic botanist.
It just underscores that whether the film had enough dramatic suspense or not, its enthusiastic portrayal of ingenuity and its strict adherence to scientific logic had a profound, tangible impact that will literally remain etched in the taxonomic record for eternity.